Welcome to the AmericanaMusic.com podcast with your host, Sarah Popejoy.
Today on AmericanaMusic.com, we welcome James Kee from the Bluegrass sensation East Nash Grass. Highly acclaimed by the 2024 International Bluegrass Music Association as New Artist of the Year, they consist of a supergroup of musicians who've played behind artists such as Dan Tyminski, Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hull, and Rhonda Vincent. Jerry Douglas from Union Station, whom we've recently interviewed, calls them a band of ringers. Their album, All God's Children, comes out August 22nd of this year on Mountain Fever Records. We're excited to have James Kee on our show. Welcome, James.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me, Sarah.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up?
I am from East Tennessee. I'm from Chattanooga, Signal Mountain to be exact. There was a pretty great bluegrass community there, and that's kind of how I got into it. My grandfather played banjo and played mandolin, and he started taking me to a place called the Mountain Opry when I was about 9 years old, which was there on Signal Mountain.
Oh, cool.
That's kind of how I got started in it. And my mom was actually from Nashville, so I live in Nashville now and have for the past 8 years or so. It was a pretty easy move just right up the road for me to come up here.
Who were some of your musical heroes growing up?
I loved the Stanley Brothers. I loved also progressive bluegrass. I loved Third Time Out. I loved anything that had, I guess, say progressive. That's still fairly traditional bluegrass, but I loved anything that was good singing. That doesn't necessarily have to be bluegrass. I also really love country, more traditional country, and I love Motown, funk, and oldies from that era. And just anything that's got good singing is kind of what has always captivated me.
East Nash Grass consists of Harry Clark on mandolin, Corey Walker on banjo, Matty Denton on fiddle, Jeff Parton on bass and dobro, and you on guitar. How did you guys meet to form East Nash Grass? And I love the name, by the way.
Well, thank you. We've sometimes it's a little hard for folks to pronounce. Yeah, we started playing at a little bar that's kind of east of East Nashville in Madison, Tennessee, called Dee's Lounge, and started playing there in 2017. Me and Harry, and then Matty came in 2018 and Corey, I think, in 2019. And then once the four of us were together, that kind of solidified the lineup. No, we just felt like we had something musically significant and we really enjoyed playing with one another. We're all about the same age, all Southerners, and all had a lot of mutual connections. We all played with different artists and did different things. And eventually the band just kind of demanded its own space. That's how we ended up becoming a touring band. And we've toured for the last, this is really in earnest. We've been touring about 3 years. I guess we're starting our fourth year of touring, and this is really our first year of everybody doing it full time. You know, we've played in other bands even up till recent years, and now this year everybody is kind of got all our eggs in this basket.
You guys have a great sound. I really love it. Your website says that collectively you guys have been on hundreds of sets and countless late night jams. Can you describe for our listeners who are not familiar what a bluegrass late night jam is?
Well, part of the culture of bluegrass is these festivals. I think there's bluegrass festivals across the country, and I think folks like the ease and portability of the music. You can just pull out, 4, 5, 6 instruments, and you can start the music anywhere you want. And that'd be acoustic guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, bass, maybe dobro. Not all bluegrassers, but most of them are pretty strict in using that very specific instrumentation. And the fact that you can kind of set it up anywhere, unlike a rock band or something like that, makes the whole festival vibe possible and makes it really neat. So all of us grew up going to these festivals. Of course, they go from early in the morning until late at night, and there's all different types of them. And that was kind of how my childhood was spent. My parents, I think, kind of liked it because I was hanging out with all these old men, instead of hanging out with people my own age. But I was just infatuated with that festival scene, and I think that's kind of something that we all had in common growing up as lifelong bluegrassers, because all of us have been doing bluegrass kind of our entire lives. And even when I at least play other genres of music or do other things, it still somehow gets branded as bluegrass. It still seems to kind of come through.
Yeah, I'm sure being around it for years, it's just probably in your cells of what you do.
Indeed. Especially being here from the South.
Yeah. The band's first single off of the album, Following You, written by you and Christian Ward, has a contagious melody that will get you toe-tapping and right out of the gate with sweet vocals by Matty Denton. James, you're quoted as saying, "We can find ourselves in those we love and follow them through all uncertainties." Can you talk a little more about that song and expand on this quote a little bit for us?
Sure. That song, when writing, for me, it's kind of the stuff that stands out and just comes back over and over. And nobody really knows. Any songwriter could probably tell you this at least, but it seems like nobody really knows where the stuff comes from, where the good ideas, a good hook, or the good melody, or the good melody with a hook, comes from. That was one that had just been kind of lingering in my mind for a while. And Maddie, when we first started playing together, hadn't really been singing at all. And then we got her to sing a few songs each set. They pretty quickly became crowd favorites. And so I thought it was probably time for her to be able to have a single on the record. And so I kind of threw some effort behind trying to come up with something that I felt like would work for her. And I just kind of had this vision for it. And I don't really know where the hook came from other than that melody and that kind of chorus that had kind of been in my brain of this concept of following you. I worked on it for a little while and I didn't really like anything that I was coming up with. I had the bones of it, but I didn't really have it all the way. And Christian Ward is a great writer. And all of us in the band had some hits for Billy Strings and Del McCurry, and several folks been cutting his music. And he's a very talented poet, wonderful writer. And so I just decided to bring him in to try to give the song justice and make sure that it would be able to make as big of a splash as possible. I really loved the way that it came out. As soon as we wrote it, I knew it would make it to the album. It was definitely something I felt pretty strongly about. And then when we went in to record it, we have a couple different ways that we do things. Sometimes we'll have a song that we have been playing on the live shows for a while and we know pretty well. But often on our albums, this is our third album now, often on our albums for the original stuff, we'll go in without ever having done it, or maybe never even having heard it. They had heard a demo that Christian had done, but the demo was really a lot different than what I ultimately envisioned we were going to play. It has some edits and things, but the version that made it on the record was actually our first pass through. I don't think that's ever happened for us before on any other track. And so it was really neat to record it because we did it just literally while everybody is learning the song and playing their first iteration at it. And everyone did such a wonderful job. I think we could all just feel it, that it was a really special take. We did it 3 times and, there's a little bit of edits on it, of course, because we didn't even know how to end it the first time we did it. So we had to fly in an ending on it. But we did it like 3 times, spent 10 minutes on it and felt really strongly about it. And that night, Maddie texted everybody and really wanted another shot at being able to do it. And I was kind of heartbroken because I just loved that first version. It just for some reason had a special shimmer over it. I said, I agreed. I said, yeah, we can go in tomorrow and we can do it again. But if we can't top the first version, then we've got to keep it, And she agreed to that. We did. We went in and did it a few more times, but nothing seemed to touch everybody's first iteration. Sometimes there's just something kind of magical that happens in the studio. Because when you're doing it time and time again, you don't ever really know which one will see the light of day.
Right.
But sometimes there's a little feeling or the little awareness that you get when you know that you just played or sang something that a lot of people are going to be able to hear throughout time. It's the most fun part about recording is you're just taking a little snapshot of where you're at that day and time. And you'll always change, and your musicianship will always change. And what you write about will always change. But, that little moment will always be preserved. I definitely felt like we kind of had a special moment on that. I was glad that Maddie was able to get her first single out with that song too.
Yeah, she did a great job. It's a great song. It's got a great melody too. It really sticks with you. The second single, Bend in the Road, written by Harry Clark and Corey Walker. I love the sensory imagery in this one with the lines like the hounds are bawling loud and shrill and turtle waiting in an old pothole. I just love those. It's a fast-moving song, and there's a line in it that says, go back to Salisaw. So I don't know if there's several Salisaws throughout the country, but we have one here in Oklahoma.
I was about to say, you're an Okie. This is your territory.
Okay. I figured it was, but I was like, are they talking about Oklahoma Salisaw?
Well, just for clarity, I had to ask. I said, what the hell is Salisaw?
Totally get it. It's a super small town. Yeah, the only reason why we probably know it here in Oklahoma is because, you get really good at geography when you get so many tornadoes. No,
I bet.
You know where all the cities are. Anyways. So the song Bend in the Road, it started out in the notes that y'all gave me, sent to me. Harry Clark's grandmother, it started out being about her and her family driving to California from Arkansas in the mid-1940s and grew into being about their hometown of Madison, Tennessee. Can you talk about that song and what it has turned into for you and the band performing it in live shows?
Yeah. So that song, I liked it. I think everybody did right out the gate. Harry and Corey did a really good job coming up with a lot of different neat phrases and things within the song that I think embodied what they were trying to do. Madison has been kind of a topic of conversation in our stage show, and it's just kind of a weird place. It's just like it seems like it's ever gentrifying, and has been since I was a kid. It's always been a strange place, a strange kind of hodgepodge of all different types of people, where people seem to care just enough. That's what we always say about it. Is it's like everything is just good enough out there. I think that's kind of why Dee's, which is an exceptional place, much more than good enough, kind of came to be, is because there was really no music scene in Madison. But even though our name is East Nash Grass, well, all of us rather, have been kind of pushed out of East Nashville due to rising real estate prices. And Madison is where a lot of musicians and artists are now living. And there's a neat music history there where John Hartford lived there, and the Scruggs family had a lot of real estate there as well. I believe lived there at different times. There's a lot of artists and musicians working there, so it made sense for a place like these to open. But it kind of gave us fodder for things to talk about, maybe even observational kind of humor with our show, where we just kind of observe some of the bizarre and often hilarious things about Madison, and you just kind of have to laugh about it. I don't know any other way to put it. Dee's Lounge is next to a donut shop and an adult bookstore and 5 Mexican restaurants, all right there on the same corner. I think they wanted to kind of tongue-in-cheek reference some of the funny things of Madison and then kind of do it in this way where they were describing like a historic drive. But I love the way that it ended up turning out.
Yeah, it's a great song. The third song, which has yet to be released at the time of this recording, Lonesome Song, has a nice swing to it. It talks about the tainted view that loss brings with a healthy dose of nostalgia. Can you talk a little bit about this song?
Our friend Chris Henry wrote that song, and Chris is a great mandolin player and guitarist and singer and obviously great writer. I can't remember if it was Corey or Harry that had kind of pitched that to me and the rest of the band. I don't know. I just thought it had such nice imagery in the song. So it was something that I felt like I could kind of sink my teeth into. And I loved the picture that it painted. I thought he was very poetic in it because it's kind of lonesome, but it's also very bluegrassy at the same time. That's the essence of bluegrass in so many ways, like doing these lonely, kind of wretched sometimes tunes with a happy melody. So I felt like it was a good fit for the band, and it was fun to play and sing that one as well.
The song Hill Country Highway, the second song on the album, I think it should be added to everybody's driving playlist. It's a tapestry of imagery with such as longhorn, sweet corn, and mule deer alongside the road running from town to town or show to show. Talk a little bit about that song.
I've never seen these mule deer that they're talking about. I'm sure they exist, but seeing everything else, I love the pictures that it paints as well. I think at least the kernel, the idea for it came from us playing in Texas in the hill country. I think that's what Harry had said, where he kind of thought up the idea. It's one of those things. It's like sometimes you have an idea, like I was talking about earlier, and it just keeps coming back. And I think that was one that just kept coming back for him, because I think we had done this Texas show that he's referencing in 2023, 22 or 23, I can't remember, where we had driven through the hill country. And on some of these dates, particularly when we were flying more, we're kind of on the road now. We have this big van and trailer and big merch set up, so we're on the road. Our first couple of years, we were always working around other artists' logistic challenges, and so we were having to fly a lot. And so often when we would get to wherever town we were going in, Band on the Rise, we're trying to save as much money. So sometimes we would immediately cram into these rental cars with all of our stuff and our merch and our instruments. And this was one of those experiences where we've got like 6 people in a SUV, with all of our stuff riding through the hill country with all of that. And I think that's kind of where the idea came from. I thought they did a really nice job with all the imagery on that one as well, because it is a fun sounding song, as you mentioned, and then has some kind of that road trip vibes a little bit. But you don't necessarily have to take the truck stop hills, the Stacker 2, Stacker 3, whatever the hell all that crap is at the countertop. Somebody must be buying that, but I don't know who it is.
That's great. Oh, yeah, you see some crazy things out on the road. The title track, All God's Children, is a very cool groove that instantly hooks you in. There's children speaking and then singing along with it, and it sounds like it's in another language. in the end in the background. Can you talk a little bit about that part of the record?
Yeah, that song, Harry and Corey and Christian Ward had been writing together a lot. In fact, they have another side project that they're working on. And there was a few tunes that I'd heard that I thought would be decent candidates for us, and that was one of them. I imagined it like what you hear on the record, and the way that the first iteration was very different. And I think the inspiration is the Burning Man Festival, which is all got a little bit of mystique to each of us because, for one, I don't know why in the hell you'd want to go out there in the middle of the desert with all these people. And two, I have no idea what goes on there. So there's a little bit of mystique around that festival. And I think Harry maybe went years ago. He's probably the only one in the group. But we liked this kind of, it's not a gospel song, obviously, but we kind of like this concept of that phrase of all God's children. And it could apply to a lot of different things. It wouldn't necessarily have to be Burning Man. But we liked just the universal adaptation, that it seemed to be able to have, at least to us. That's how we interpreted it. We actually reached out to famous guitarist David Greer. His son is a very young, he's half Japanese. He's like 9 years old or 7 years old or something like. His name is Nash Greer. And so that's who you're hearing on the record. We had him come in, and he actually is speaking a little bit of Japanese as well. I do not know what he's saying. We paid him, I think he wanted like $51 or something like that. It was some arbitrary amount, for a 7-year-old or 9-year-old or whatever he is. I should get that right. I should find out what his age is. It was Corey's idea to bring him in, and we just kind of loved it there at the end with him singing along. And if you live in Nashville or if you visit Nashville, there is a chance you may see him if you go out to some of the bars in Nashville, like the American Legion Bluegrass Jam on Wednesdays, and Skinny Dennis is doing shows as well, which is a new place. Nash plays the fiddle, and he's quite a ham, and he's going to be a great musician. So we just thought he's the perfect kid to get on here and be the child. That's him that you're hearing.
Oh, well, it's really sweet and really, really lovely, especially the part where he's singing at the end as well.
Yeah.
Really...
Yeah, we thought that was pretty cute. Money well spent.
Yes, 51. That's great. James, I just want to thank you so much for being with us on the show. The new album, All God's Children by East Nash Grass, releases to the public August 22nd of this year. It's full of toe-tapping, ear-catching melodies that are contagious. So be sure to follow them on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your music.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sarah. You've had so many of my favorite artists on here lately, and some of them I've got to work with, some of them I'm just fans of. So I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, we've been really lucky, and really lucky to have you on the show, too. I appreciate you sharing about this new album. It's a lot of really great songs on the album. I wanted to share with you something special, something I've been working on lately. It's called American Music Town. It's not set to even come out until September of this year, but follow the show so that you won't miss an episode. Here's a short clip. There's this magical small town in northern Alabama, a 2.5-hour drive south of Nashville, where they say the music is in the mud. And even though many music listeners may not know about the town, they are aware of its impact on American music through the iconic songs they've heard on the radio. Songs like When a Man Loves a Woman by Percy Sledge, Respect by Aretha Franklin, and Wild Horses by the Rolling Stones are just a few of the big hits that have churned out because of the creative energy captivated by the town of Muscle Shoals. The University of North Alabama's Shoals Music Archive stores recordings, photographs, posters, handwritten lyrics, musical scores, and oral histories related to Muscle Shoals. We have the privilege today of interviewing Brian Corrigan. He's a music preservation consultant for the Muscle Shoals National Heritage Area. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, Brian.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Brian, can you describe to our listeners your role in the Muscle Shoals Music Archives and what you do for the University of North Alabama?
So my current role at the university is with its affiliate, the Muscle Shoals National Heritage Area. Mm-hmm. I've worked there since 2017 as a music preservation consultant. I manage our Roots of American Music Trail websites. I conduct interviews with musicians, and I make digital content for social media. As for the music archive itself, I've helped the organizing professor, Brian Dempsey, track down interview footage from various sources. And in the spring, I'll be teaching a digital collections management management class at UNA and working with students on archive-related projects.
Muscle Shoals, according to census.gov, showed a population of 17,409 in mid-year 2024. The closest large cities are Birmingham, just under a couple hours away, and Nashville, just under 2.5 hours away. Most music towns are huge, like Los Angeles, New York, Austin, and Nashville. Describe to us what was happening creatively in this area of the country to make Muscle Shoals such a magnet for great music.
Well, I think a big part of what makes the Shoals is that it's about halfway between Memphis and Nashville. So there's been a musical network of sorts between those places and the Shoals that going back to the 1940s. So during that time, there was a country group, for example, called the Blue Seal Pals, and they played on local radio stations and ended up auditioning for the Grand Ole Opry and went to Nashville. And then a couple years later, they broke up. And some of the guys stayed in Nashville. Some of the guys moved to Memphis to work in the recording studios there. Then one of the members, a guy named Dexter Johnson, ended up moving back to the Shoals. And this was during the 1950s, before there were any studios in Muscle Shoals. And he built a studio in his home garage where singers would come and do demos and that sort of thing. And his nephew is actually Jimmy Johnson, who went on to be a swamper. And he was also a sound engineer at Fame Studios and Muscle Shoals Sound. And Dexter Johnson would later work for Jimmy at Muscle Shoals Sound. But also in the 50s, there was a local publishing company here called Tune Records, which leveraged its connections with Nashville publishers. And people like Rick Hall, who came to the Shoals to pitch songs to Tune Records, viewed the Shoals as a springboard to Nashville because the Shoals itself was not much. And so he did a lot of traveling back and forth after he'd come here to Nashville. But at the same time, like you hinted at, distance from places like Nashville and Memphis was also a factor. 2.5 hours away from each. And the atmosphere here is obviously a smaller town atmosphere. There was no scene here then because there was no alcohol until around 1980 when I was born. Mick Jagger, Paul Simon could come to the Shoals, work in the studio, and walk around town completely anonymous, you know. The no booze thing was probably good for productivity too.
I'm sure after being out on the road. Later in the podcast, you'll hear our interview with Rodney Hall, the son of Rick Hall. Can you tell our audience who Rick Hall was and his impact on the Muscle Shoals area?
Sure. Rick Hall was a producer. He was a publisher. He was a songwriter at one point. He was a musician himself. And then, of course, he was a studio owner. He was born in Hamilton, Alabama, 1932. He produced the Shoals area's first national radio hits, starting in 1962 with a song called You Better Move On by Arthur Alexander. It was that same year in 1962 that he opened Fame Studios. And of course, over the next decade, a lot of the big soul and R&B hits that we associate with the 60s came out of Fame Studios. So that's Wilson Pickett's Mustang Sally, I'm Your Puppet by James and Bobby Purify, Weed Soul Music, you know, Aretha Franklin got 2 tracks here, I Never Loved a Man and Do Right Woman. So he's probably remembered today mostly for those records, but his commercial peak was actually later in the early 70s when he shifted in a more sort of mainstream pop direction and had hits with the Osmonds, Bobby Gentry's Fancy, Paul Anka, artists like that. He reached number 1 with a song called Baby Don't Get Hooked on Me in 1971 or 1972. And so that was kind of a country pop crossover hit for a guy named Mag Davis. At that point, Rick started focusing more on country and moving in that direction, as did the Muscle Shoals music industry in general. So during the 80s, he had a lot of success with a group called Shenandoah. He worked with Alabama, the band. His publishing company at Fame had big country hits like I Swear from the 90s, and they still do a lot of work in the area of country.
Yeah, Chris Stapleton.
As far as his impact on the Shoals, the biggest impact probably came from the example that he set with Fame, which inspired the opening of other local studios, and there's probably at least a dozen around there today. So the first studio that spun off sort of from Fame was Quinby, and that's actually where When a Man Loves a Woman was recorded, 1965. A few years later, it was musicians from Fame that left to form probably the second biggest studio in town, which is Muscle Shoals Sound. And there were others too, like smaller studios like Widget, right down the street from Muscle Shoals Sound. I mentioned that in the 70s, Rick and Fame kind of started moving in a country direction, and that's when you began to see country-focused studios opening up. A place called Music Mill, like right across the street from Fame. And then near the airport, there's a place called Wishbone, which is where Hank Williams Jr. did Family Tradition. Association.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of the Muscle Shoals music story beyond fame, but it wouldn't happen without Rick Hall, I don't think. He was also instrumental in founding the Muscle Shoals Music Association, kind of brought all the local studio owners together as the number of studios kept growing and growing. And that sort of has built the music tourism industry that we have today.
Here's a short clip from next week's interview with C.J. Lewandowski. We want to share with you a little bit of bluegrass history for context. Our story starts with Bobby Osborne. Bobby grew up listening to country artist Ernest Tubb over WSM's The Grand Ole Opry. Now, Ernest Tubb's biggest song you might recognize was Walking the Floor Over You. So one day, Bill Monroe came over the radio on WSM, and the next day, Bobby saw Bill Monroe live in Dayton. In the band were Flatt and Scruggs, along with Chubby Wise and Howard Watts. Bobby fell in love with bluegrass and eventually went from guitar player to playing mandolin, yet keeping in the similar vocal style of Ernest Tubb. What's interesting about that is that bluegrass did not even become its own genre until 1945, when Bobby had just turned 14. Bobby and his brother Sonny formed the group the Osborne Brothers. They helped bridge the gap between country music and bluegrass. The Osborne Brothers were inducted into the Bluegrass Hall of Fame in 1994. They were the first bluegrass band to play at a college campus and the first bluegrass group to play at the White House. Bobby became a member of the Grand Ole Opry on August 8, 1964, and has had countless awards. Bobby has since passed at the age of 91 in the summer of 2023. Now, this brings us to the present Grammy-nominated vocalist and mandolin player, C.J. Lewandowski. C.J. is the lead vocalist and founded the bluegrass band, the Po Ramblin' Boys. Now, CJ has an incredible album that celebrates the life and music of Bobby Osborne, with some of the last recordings of Bobby Osborne on it. Thank you so much for listening to AmericanaMusic.com podcast. Be sure to go to AmericanaMusic.com and find playlists of the Americana artists we've interviewed here. Also, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform.